Hey friends, it's Becky L. McCoy, and this is Sucker Punched. Hey friends, if you know me even a little bit, you know that I have never been known for doing things in halves or I don't know, I guess I like to try and be subtle, but what I'm trying to say is we are just going to jump in with 2 feet today and talk about disappointment with God. Because we've all felt it. Like I just went on Amazon and in like the book section, I just put in disappointment God. And right away, 216 results came up, right? That's quite a bit of words that people have written about being disappointed with God. Probably the most notable is Philip Yancey's book, Disappointment with God. He also wrote Where is God When It Hurts? Craig Rochelle wrote Hope in the Dark. Peter Chin, Blindsided by God. Lisa TerKeurst, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. Luke Norsworthy, God Over Good. The Surprising Grace of Disappointment by John Kostler. I'm not sure if I said that right. We're going to just guess. And then right at the bottom, the sponsored book is What's Up with Your Pumpkin? Keys and Steps to Reaching Your Dream. I love Amazon. Anyways, so if you've ever thought that maybe being disappointed with God, there was something wrong with you, or you're doing it wrong, or you need to like fix that because it's not okay to be disappointed with God. I just want to, I wish I could reach through and give you a hug because I totally would. But it's okay. Like, I mean, these are just 216 books that come up when you put disappointment with God. So that's dealing directly with the disappointment. But then there are all these other books, that kind of deal with the fallout of disappointment and how kind of grappling with like what does your attitude look like, or when you're grieving, or when these different kinds of disappointment. So that's all to say you are not alone if you have ever experienced that kind of disappointment. I have, for sure. Right? Like, in the big picture, like I didn't get married, and say vows of till death do us part, like to actually have to do that, right? That's disappointing. It was disappointing when I didn't get into the musical theater program that I had my heart set on when I was going to college. It was disappointing, when someone who you think might be a boss or a mentor doesn't follow through. It's, there's so many different kinds of disappointment. And if we're disappointed with God, it doesn't mean that we're blaming him, but we had expected him to keep us from suffering. And so Jonathan Merritt, in his new book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch, dedicated an entire chapter to disappointment. And I just loved it so much that we had to do a whole series on it because it's so true. And we get into it a lot in our conversation today. But it's really been, as I've been listening to these different stories from the different people in this series, it's really given me the opportunity to reflect on the different disappointments that I've experienced and kind of, have the long-term vision to see like, oh, well, this didn't work out the way that I wanted it to, but it's either come full circle and it's worked out now, or I realized that I actually didn't want that to happen anyways. And some disappointments don't really resolve themselves and we have to change our attitude. But I could go on and on and on. I really want you to listen to my conversation with Jonathan, because it was just so encouraging for me, and I know it will be for you. And hang in there for my conversation with Jonathan. Right now, I wanted to thank the sponsors of this episode of Sucker Punched. The podcast is edited and mastered by Resonate Recordings. They are wonderful to work with. They're so professional. And I've just really enjoyed being able to give up the technical aspects of the podcast. So if you have a podcast or you're interested in podcasting, definitely check them out at resonaterecordings.com. Also, you've heard the last few episodes about this company called Beauty Counter. My friend Teresa Ido is an independent consultant, and Beauty Counter is skincare and cosmetics, but they've worked really hard to make sure that all of their ingredients are safe, so you can use it on your kids, with your family, without having to worry about like, what is this doing to our bodies? So they like to say that all of their products come with peace of mind. If you're interested, please reach out to Teresa. Her name is spelled Teresa Idoux, Idoux, and you can find her at beautycounter.com/Teresa Idoux. Lastly, if you are in a season of disappointment right now and you just don't know what to do and you feel like you need people to come alongside you, so you can kind of figure out what's next, what does a pivot look like, or what does totally changing how you expect to move forward, I would love for you to join us in the coaching group that is just starting up. So you haven't even missed anything. It's called Resiliency Coaching. And the idea is that we are going to figure out, what does it look like for us to be brave and confident and resilient when life is really hard. You can find out more information at beckylmccoy.com/coaching. I am here today with Jonathan Merritt, and we're talking in August, but you'll be hearing it in September. So his new book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch, just came out. And I don't think I told Jonathan this, but chapter 11 in the book was kind of the inspiration for this series of the podcast. The whole book is basically the etymology, the study of the origin of different words we use in faith spaces, and disappointment was one of them. So welcome to Sucker Punched.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Happy August to you, and happy September to everybody listening.
Yeah, right. Here we are. So I was wondering if you could kind of, in all the research you did, define disappointment for us, and you also very closely link it to disillusionment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that was sparked this book was moving to New York City. And when I moved here, there was a whole bunch of different things that happened. And I wouldn't have chosen a lot of those things. I think they sort of chose me. Life just happened, as it were. One of those experiences for me was the development of a chronic pain disorder. And I don't know how many of your listeners have ever struggled with something like that, but it's a totally isolating and debilitating thing, especially for someone in their 30s who heretofore has sort of had this invincibility complex. And, so the pain disorder just sort of struck, and doctors couldn't tell me what it was. My work day was dramatically reduced, and of course I work mostly on contract and freelance, so I eat what I kill, and I if I don't work, I can't pay my bills. And so it was really hard. And I think in the midst of that, and I'm still working on even admitting this and admitting this to myself. I've been working through it with my counselor this week, is I was really, really disappointed with God. I felt like there were things that, um, in some ways, looking back, maybe there were things that I felt like were owed to me, or at least there were expectations I had developed about God. And that sort of is, as I write in this chapter, that sort of is what disappointment is, right? Something is appointed, it should happen, and then it doesn't, and you feel disappointed. And I think for a lot of people, we place expectations on God, ourselves, others, and when you fail to have those expectations, when those expectations are not met, suddenly you find yourself in disappointment, wondering, well, now what do I do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of, on this podcast, I'm helping people to share their stories of these different really, really hard emotional experiences, and how we're all kind of working through. We kind of grew up in church learning that Christians don't get disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're adults and we're like, wait a minute, that's not true. Because here I am. And like when my husband passed away, like that was disappointing. You don't make lifelong vows to expect them to be not met. And I really like in that chapter, you say God does not intend to meet our expectations. Instead, God intends to meet our needs. So how did that idea kind of help you to deal with the disappointment of having a chronic pain issue?
Well, it started with admitting that, and this goes back to something you just said, it started with being honest. I always tell people, and this is sort of a framework in life, is that there's a difference between knowing and naming. In other words, like you can know deep down that you have this kind of disappointment with God, but it doesn't become real until you somehow muster the courage to name it, to say it, to embrace it, to accept it. And that is what I began to do. I began to say that. I mean, I write in the book, I say, my disappointment with others egged, but it was nothing compared to what I felt toward God. Come on, God, you know my story. You were there when my neighbor abused me as a child. You know how awkward and alienated I felt during adolescence. You know I've struggled with anxiety and depression my entire adult life. I'm starting to see sunlight, to get a little relief, and then this happens, really? Then I say that, that was the edited version, that I spoke words to God that the MPAA would bar from a PG-13 movie.
Yep.
So I think it's learning to name it. But in the midst of this, you talk about how did I realize that God intends, or that I believe that God intends to meet our needs, primarily, and not our wants.
Mm-hmm.
It was through really rediscovering this story of Palm Sunday. I was really wrestling in that season. I had some broken relationships. I felt very lonely and isolated. And then on top of it, I had for years, at this point, almost 2 years, this nagging pain disorder. And now was just accepting that this would be something I might have my whole life. And I encountered this story of Jesus riding into the city on a donkey. And I start to do the historical research, and I realize Jesus is sort of, he couldn't do this better if he were a publicist. He was he's playing up a story, and it was really fascinating because if you look at the history, there's a story of a Jewish liberator who rode into the city from the same direction and liberated the city from the oppressive powers. and they laid down the branches, and there was the whole scene of Hosanna, which means Lord, save now.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is triggering this because everybody is looking for that sort of liberator from the Romans. And Jesus sort of, it seems like he's trying to play on their disappointments, because, as you know, Jesus never intends to do that at all. And if anybody had been paying attention, they certainly would have realized that.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have Jesus sort of triggering this thing for people. And then, as the story goes, their hosannas turn to crucify him. And you realize that what God was doing in Christ in that moment was attempting not to disappoint them, but to disillusion them. The word disillusion, it means to sort of rid us of our illusions, the things that we think are true or real that are not. They fall away. And now we can see the world for what it is. And that's almost always a painful thing, a terrible thing in many ways, a hard thing, an agonizing thing to be disillusioned. But it's almost always a net positive in our lives, because now we can see clearly. Now we can deal with reality as it is. And so, just as Jesus did, I would say, on that Palm Sunday so many years ago, my pain disorder was a tool to disillusion me about who God was and was not, what God promised and did not promise, and who I was, and the new reality of my own life. And so it's a very difficult journey to walk from what we call disappointment into this divine disillusionment. But one thing I have realized is it's worth it.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how you close this particular chapter in talking about how disillusionment has led you to like a more honest perspective on your life and your limitations. And now you're able to set more, like, it doesn't mean you can't be a writer anymore. It just means you have to limit the hours that you write at a time and kind of design a new writing life that suits the reality that you can now see because you've gone through this disillusionment process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, the reflection I do on pain, which is subtitled Chronic Conditions and Other Metaphors, is intentionally placed right before disappointment, which is dopamine roller coasters and palm branches. And I say in that section what the pain taught me, and these things they're linked, they're connected. So whatever that trigger is for you, maybe it is physical pain, maybe it's emotional pain, maybe it's a sense of loss, maybe it is an aching depression, a mental health struggle, maybe it's a failed relationship, or a failed job, or some sort of insecurity. Whatever the pain is that is caused the disappointment, the disillusionment. You learn from that. It's a terrible teacher, but a teacher nonetheless. And so I said there, I've learned that I'm not omnipotent. I have to relinquish control of my present as well as my future. I realize I'm not infinite, and I should enjoy each day without rushing through. I've learned that I'm not empathetic, and I now find myself more attentive to painful cries around me. And I've also stopped taking any pain-free moments for granted. So gratitude is now a greater part of my life rhythm. And there's a great quote by Carl Jung where he says, if you kill your pain before you answer its questions, you'll kill yourself along with it. And I really believe that's true.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I talked in 2 episodes ago, in episode 50, about what it means to just sit with your grief, and that you really have to feel the things in order to be able to move towards healing. So when you're talking about disappointment in having this chronic pain disorder, what would you say, like, because the healing and the resolution of this disappointment so far has not been healing of the chronic pain. So how have you seen some of the redemption and resolution in this particular story in your life?
Mm. Well, I would say a couple of things. What I would not I wouldn't want to tell people, well, you just need to embrace your situation, let go, stop looking for answers, stop. That this is just God just intends for you to have this to teach you something,
Yeah.
and I address that really clearly in the book. I've continued to look for not just answers, solutions, and cures, but for management tools and practices. And I'm always trying new things. And I'm able now to manage my situation a lot better than I was able to before. And that's been a journey. I think it will continue to be a journey. But what I always say is there are a lot of people, when they think about healing, when they think about pain, when they think about trial, difficulty, whatever, because we're like these postmodern 21st century Westerners who are flooded with information and 12-step programs, we want a system, we want a plan, we want an acronym, and those things can be helpful. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people are helped by those kinds of things. But in many ways, I think sometimes that actually compounds our pain. It compounds our disappointment. It compounds our disillusionment, because we then jump from one thing to another. And we end up just like something, it's this constant like hope and failure sort of a pendulum that goes back, like, oh, this is going to be the thing. Oh, that wasn't the thing. Oh, this is going to be the thing. Oh, that wasn't going to be the thing. Right. And so you need to keep trying that. But I think to keep yourself rooted rather than always grasping for the next thing, and sort of placing on that the expectation that this is it. So for me, like now, when, rather than if somebody says, oh, you should go see this doctor or you should try this program, I'm willing to do that. But unlike years ago, I would say, oh, I figured it out. I figured out what's wrong, and I figured out how to fix it, and this is going to fix it. And I tell everybody that. And then, 3 months later, they're like, oh, I thought you were better. And you're like, no, I'm not better. I need to try a new protocol. That didn't work. That thing didn't work. Now, I'm far more open to it. And I just say, hey, this is a journey. And like, I'm trying this out, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we'll try something else. Like, it's just the journey toward health, and it's not the search for a silver bullet.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. Sometimes I wish it was a video podcast, because I'm like sitting here nodding my head, wanting to shout like, yes, amen. Like this stuff doesn't always resolve the way that would be nice and pretty.
Yeah, like I don't know. What have you tried in your own life? What was the thing that you thought would do the trick? It's like I'll hear people, not to interrupt my own question, but like I know people who've gone through divorce.
Yeah.
And they'll go, oh, I know what I need to do. I just need to just get back out there and start dating again.
Right.
And they do that, but then they still have all this emotional stuff, right? And all this pain and hurt. And people are like, yeah, but I thought you were getting out there. And they thought, or people who are like, they're overloaded, they're stressed, they're burnt out. And they're like, you know what? I just need a getaway with the girls. I just need a vacation. I just need some alone time. And there's this sort of working assumption that that's going to fix it. And what you realize is that you continue to hang your hopes on that, on that thing, that silver bullet, that strategy. And I always just encourage people instead for open hands, and stop using your hands to grasp for that thing that's going to solve it all. And instead just have open hands and say, you know what, I'll tell you what I need right now. I
Mm-hmm.
need some alone time. I need to get away with the girls. I need to get back out there. And I don't know if that's going to fix it. That's not even what I'm after. I just know that right now I can tell you what I need right now, and I cannot tell you what tomorrow will look like, but we'll deal with it when we get to tomorrow. So, what are some of the things that you in your own life tried, encountered? They failed, they worked, whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that come to mind is dealing with chronic anxiety and depression. And there isn't just one thing. Like it's, I am one of those people that has to take medication. I don't do well without it. But on top of the medication, there's also doing things like meditation and other grounding, mentally and emotionally grounding things. And there's
Mhm.
counseling on a regular basis. And one of the things I've really been learning lately is having to let my friends and family know the warning signs of when deep depression is kind of on the horizon, so that they can call it out too. And really realizing that it's doing lots of little things to kind of maintain a status quo. And so that if one thing gets dropped, okay, I can still manage this. But I'm not just depending on, like you said, that one thing that's going to fix it all, because God doesn't promise. I mean, he's working towards a new heaven and a new earth, but we're not quite there yet. And so I can't expect that every problem that I have is going to be perfected in my own lifetime here on earth.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Christians believe there is a silver bullet, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the thing that takes you out. It's the thing that finally, that in some ways, that the thing that the moment, the only silver bullet, in the sense that the only thing that solves your problems is crossing over.
Right.
That's where healing comes. That's where all that. But here, you're just. I've realized, like, you're not going to fix those things here.
Yeah.
And
And what if you have another 70 years? That's a long time to
oh
have
wow,
to just kind of wait,
yeah, yeah.
you
And
know?
I've felt that way too. I've often felt really frustrated with when I do the math. I don't know if you ever feel that way, where I'm like, oh man, if it's been this hard for this long, how much longer? But you know what? I will tell you, as one of the things that makes it so hard to think about the length of time, the length of life, is when you live in this constant state of disappointment. I think when you shift your perspective and when you learn to let go, then you start to actually enjoy the ride a little bit, because it's, one of
Mm-hmm.
the things I've learned in meditation is impermanence. Like, today is not what tomorrow will be like. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
today's difficult, tomorrow could be great. And
Yep.
so, not always. One of the most discouraging things that can happen is when you have this thought, the way it is now is the way it always will be.
Yes.
And so you have to actively combat that
Mm-hmm.
and say, no, actually, the way it is now is not the way it always will be. And life teaches us that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Hmm.
Well, everyone should definitely, your book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch, is available everywhere by the time people are listening to this. And I just have been strongly recommending that everyone read it, but definitely now that it's available, everybody should grab a copy.
Yeah, and what I really hope is that people will see, well, the book sort of premise that sacred words and spiritual conversations are dying in the Western world. They're dying in
Mm-hmm.
America. And what we have even done on this podcast is an example of what I want to do with my book, is what I want people who read my book to do,
Yeah.
is to begin to do what we just did here electronically. They would do it physically. They would do
Yeah.
it with friends and neighbors, and they would begin to wrestle through these words, because I think you'd be the first to tell all of your listeners you don't have all the answers. And I would say the same thing to my readers and to your listeners. I don't have all the answers. But, what the ancient rabbis used to say, God is in the wrestling. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we all think that God is in the answer. But actually, there's
Yeah.
something really divine in that process, in that space between the question and the answer, that God's actually in that space as well. And so what I hope is to help people, just like I hope them to get in between the problem and the solution in their own life through this chapter on disappointment. I think the book in general is to help people become comfortable with these spiritual questions and to embrace that holy wrestling in that liminal space. So I hope people will pick it up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we could probably go on all day.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Honestly, Jonathan and I could have talked probably all day long. Like, even after we stopped recording for the episode, we talked for like another 20 or 30 minutes because this stuff is just so important. Words have definitions for a reason, and the way that we use language really impacts not just our lives and our relationships, but our culture. And if you're interested in that, definitely grab his book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch. It's wherever you get your books. And it's honestly one of my very favorite books of this year. And I will go back to it forever and ever and ever, probably. I mean, it's really that good. And I'm just so grateful that we got the chance to talk and just really tease out more of what disappointment means and what it looks like in real life and how we can handle it. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It doesn't look the same for every person. But you know what? It's real life. So having these conversations is really special and really important. So thanks, Jonathan, for joining me for that conversation. If you're interested in coming to the Brave Together virtual retreat, it's in just over a week. So make sure that you sign up as soon as possible to grab your spot. You can find more information on that at beckylmccoy.com/September 29 virtual retreat. I'm so excited. The speakers this retreat are just, I always say this, but it's so true. Like, these are some fierce women and they're so encouraging and wonderful. And, even though we're sharing virtual space, I am better just from getting to share that space with them. They're really, really, really wonderful. And you'll be encouraged and challenged and rested and like all the things all at one time. It's awesome. If you have questions, send me an email, or you can find out all the information on the registration page. I would love to get to know you better. Find me anywhere on social media at Becky L. McCoy. You can find my blog. There's contact info there, beckylmccoy.com. Listen to more episodes of this podcast. Share them with your friends. Talk about them. Like, this is meant to both encourage and comfort you and to encourage conversation about hard things with you and your people. Share an episode with a friend. Leave a rating and review so that somebody else can find the episode or the podcast. That's really, really helpful for new listeners to find the podcast, for you to rate and review it. And I'm sure that you hear that all the time, but it's because it's true. And it's not like a vanity thing, like, oh, I want to have so many 5-star reviews, but because the iTunes algorithms and other algorithms use that data to recommend new podcasts. So it really is super helpful. Thanks so much for listening. I'm so glad that you were here today. And I hope that this conversation has been really encouraging to you as you reflect on your own disappointments in life. Join me next week. I'm going to talk to Jennifer Dukes Lee about a professional disappointment that she experienced And not every disappointment has to be this like life altering thing, like being widowed or chronic pain, or, you know, those things are disappointing, but there are plenty of other disappointments that are just as painful in their own ways. So I hope that you will join me next week when I chat with Jennifer Dukesley.